Something massive is entering our atmosphere, and it's not an asteroid NASA was expecting. For months, telescopes tracked 3I/ATLAS as just another interstellar visitor. But now, as it closes in on Earth, new data reveals it's not what scientists thought. It's bigger, faster, and showing behavior that defies every orbital model. Atlas isn't 2 kilometers across. It's 47 kilometers across. We weren't looking at a small asteroid. We've been tracking something the size of a small moon, and it's been decelerating for the past 6 weeks, which means it's not just passing through our solar system. It's planning to stop here. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to reveal about Atlas's true size, its internal structure, and what it's been doing as it approaches Earth is going to fundamentally change everything you thought you knew about this object. The miscalculation wasn't a simple error, it was systematic, deliberate, like Atlas was designed to appear smaller than it actually is until it got close enough that the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. And now that we know how big it really is, we're starting to understand what we're actually dealing with. This isn't a rock from interstellar space. This is something built, and it's almost here. Let me explain how the entire scientific community miscalculated something this massive by such an enormous margin. When we first detected ATLAS, it was still beyond Neptune's orbit. At that distance, we rely on brightness measurements and spectroscopic analysis to estimate size. The math is straightforward: measure how much light it reflects, estimate its composition, calculate approximate size. For months, Atlas appeared to be reflecting light consistent with a dark, rocky surface about 2 kilometers in diameter. Every measurement confirmed this, every calculation aligned. The data was consistent, but here's what nobody realized. ATLAS wasn't reflecting light naturally. It was controlling its brightness. 3 days ago, when NASA's Deep Space Imaging Array finally achieved resolution detailed enough for surface mapping, they noticed something impossible. Atlas's surface wasn't uniformly dark. It had patterns, geometric patterns, hexagonal structures covering the entire surface like scales. And these structures were actively absorbing incoming light, not just reflecting it poorly, actively capturing and suppressing it, like stealth coating on military aircraft, but across an entire 47-kilometer object. A researcher examining the images described the moment of realization. We were looking at the first high-resolution scan, thinking we'd see craters and irregular rock formations. Instead, we saw a perfectly engineered surface with symmetrical structures repeated across the entire visible area. It was like expecting to photograph a mountain and discovering you're actually looking at a building designed to look like a mountain from a distance. The hexagonal structures aren't natural geological formations, they're manufactured, precision engineered to a tolerance that suggests technology far beyond our current capabilities. Each hexagon is approximately 400 meters across. The entire surface of Atlas is covered with over 11,000 of these structures, and they're all oriented in patterns that suggest deliberate design, like solar panels or sensor arrays, or something we don't have reference for. When NASA recalculated Atlas's actual size based on physical surface mapping rather than brightness estimates, the numbers were stunning. Mass estimates increased by a factor of 24. Internal volume calculations suggested Atlas is large enough to contain structures the size of cities inside it. We weren't wrong because we're bad at math. We were wrong because something designed Atlas to deceive our measurements until it got close enough that the deception no longer mattered. Here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. ATLAS has been slowing down. Objects in space don't just slow down. There's no friction, no air resistance. If something enters our solar system at high velocity, it maintains that velocity unless something acts on it. Natural objects would either maintain speed and pass through, or be captured by the sun's gravity and enter an elliptical orbit. Atlas is doing neither. 6 weeks ago, Atlas was traveling at 87 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. Standard interstellar velocity. Then it started decelerating. Not through gravitational interaction, through active propulsion. NASA detected the deceleration through minute changes in ATLAS's spectroscopic signature. The rear-facing surface began showing thermal emissions consistent with massive energy release, not reflected sunlight, heat generated from within the object. Atlas is firing engines, braking thrusters, slowing itself down from interstellar velocity to solar system orbital speeds. Current velocity, 31 kilometers per second and decreasing. At current deceleration rates, Atlas will reach relative velocity zero with respect to Earth in approximately 14 days. Let me be clear about what that means. An object the size of a small moon with a manufactured surface and internal power systems capable of generating the thrust needed to decelerate 47 kilometers of mass will come to a complete stop relative to our planet in 2 weeks. But the deceleration isn't the most disturbing part. The trajectory is. Atlas isn't heading toward the Sun or into a stable orbit around Jupiter or any other destination that would make sense for natural orbital mechanics. Atlas adjusted its trajectory 3 weeks ago. Another burn, another course correction. It's heading directly toward Earth's orbital path, and its current deceleration profile will bring it to a stop approximately 384,000 kilometers from Earth's surface. That's lunar distance. Atlas is planning to position itself in the same orbital space as our Moon, not passing by Earth, not entering solar orbit, stopping at the exact distance where humanity has its only natural satellite. Once NASA understood Atlas's true size, they immediately began deep structure analysis using ground-penetrating radar and gravitational measurements. What they found inside makes the surface features look mundane by comparison. Atlas is not solid, it's hollow, or more accurately, it's compartmentalized. Radar imaging reveals a complex internal structure with massive empty spaces separated by structural supports. These aren't natural cavities like you'd find in a porous asteroid. They're chambers, deliberately constructed spaces with geometric boundaries. The largest internal chamber measures approximately 12 kilometers across and extends nearly 8 kilometers deep into Atlas's interior. That's large enough to fit Manhattan Island inside with room to spare. And it's not the only one. Radar has identified at least 17 major internal chambers plus hundreds of smaller spaces. The structural supports between chambers show engineering characteristics, load-bearing architecture, symmetrical placement, distribution patterns that suggest deliberate design to handle stress and maintain structural integrity during acceleration or maneuvering. Gravitational analysis confirms the internal structure. Atlas's total mass is approximately 8.7 trillion kilograms, enormous in absolute terms, but far less than a solid rocky body of equivalent size would mass. The density calculations suggest Atlas is roughly 40% empty space by volume. But here's what's genuinely disturbing. Some of those internal chambers are showing thermal signatures. Heat. Not uniform temperature from solar radiation, but localized heat sources inside specific chambers. Temperature differentials suggest active systems. Power generation. Possibly life support. Something inside Atlas is producing heat in patterns that don't match any natural process. NASA also detected electromagnetic emissions originating from inside the object. Not communications, at least not the kind we've been monitoring externally. These are internal signals, short-range transmissions between different sections of ATLAS's interior structure. It's like watching a building's internal network. Different rooms communicating with each other, systems coordinating, an entire infrastructure operating inside this object as it approaches Earth. One analysis suggested the electromagnetic patterns resemble what you'd expect from automated systems conducting status checks and operational coordination. Like a massive facility powering up, running diagnostics, preparing systems for arrival at a destination. The most unsettling detail came from spectroscopic analysis of small venting events on ATLAS's surface. 3 times over the past week, the hexagonal structures opened briefly, releasing gas into space before closing again. The gas composition was analyzed. It contained nitrogen, oxygen, and trace amounts of carbon dioxide. The ratios don't match any known natural process, but they do match something familiar: Earth's atmosphere. Whatever is inside Atlas, it's venting air, breathable air. Either it's carrying an atmosphere from somewhere else, or it's generating one. Both possibilities suggest something inside those chambers needs oxygen. As Atlas approaches Earth, its surface is transforming. The hexagonal structures that initially appeared static are now actively reconfiguring. High-resolution imaging over the past 72 hours shows individual hexagons opening, rotating, and repositioning. Not random movement, coordinated changes following clear patterns across the entire surface. Some hexagons are opening to reveal underlying structures. What appeared to be solid panels are actually covering something beneath. Telescopic imaging has captured glimpses of machinery, framework, and what might be sensor equipment being exposed as the hexagons retract. Other hexagons are changing orientation, rotating to face different directions. As Atlas approaches Earth, more and more of these structures are rotating to orient directly toward our planet, like thousands of cameras or sensors all turning to point at their target. The surface transformation accelerated dramatically 36 hours ago. What was happening to a few dozen hexagons per day suddenly increased to hundreds of structures reconfiguring simultaneously. It's like watching something wake up. Systems activating, preparations completing. NASA counted the number of hexagons currently oriented toward Earth. Over 3,200 structures, all aimed directly at our planet. Each one is 400 meters across, which means we're being observed or scanned by surface features covering over 500 square kilometers of Atlas's surface, an area larger than the entire city of Los Angeles, all focused on Earth. But the most striking change happened just 18 hours ago. A section of Atlas's surface approximately 5 kilometers across began opening, not individual hexagons, an entire region of the surface retracting like blast doors. The opening revealed an internal structure that telescopes are still analyzing. Initial observations show framework supports and what appears to be a large central structure or mechanism inside the opening. The purpose is unknown, but the opening faces Earth and continues to widen. At current expansion rates, this aperture will be fully open in approximately 11 days, right around the time Atlas reaches its planned stopping point at lunar distance. Something inside is being revealed, something large enough that it requires a 5-kilometer opening to deploy or emerge. And whatever it is, it's aimed at Earth. 5 days ago, every major radio telescope on Earth detected the same thing simultaneously. Atlas's energy output increased by 340%. This wasn't gradual, this wasn't a steady ramp-up. In less than 2 hours, Atlas went from generating power levels consistent with a large facility to generating power equivalent to a major metropolitan area. The energy signature is electromagnetic radiation across multiple frequencies, heat dissipation from what must be massive internal power systems, and something else, a specific frequency pattern that scientists recognize but can't explain in this context. Atlas is generating powerful magnetic fields, fluctuating fields with organized patterns that suggest controlled manipulation of electromagnetic forces. The field strength is intense enough to be measurable from Earth orbit, which means at its source inside Atlas, the magnetic fields are extraordinarily powerful. Why would something generate magnetic fields of that intensity? Only a few applications require that level of power: experimental fusion reactors, particle accelerators, or propulsion systems based on electromagnetic principles we're still developing in early experimental stages. Whatever Atlas is powering up, it requires energy and magnetic control far beyond anything in our current technological capabilities. The energy spike also correlates with increased activity in ATLAS's internal chambers. The thermal signatures from those hollow spaces intensified immediately after the power-up. More systems activating, more processes beginning, more preparation for something. NASA's analysts tried to calculate what could require this much power. The numbers are staggering. Atlas is currently generating approximately 15 gigawatts of continuous power. For comparison, That's equivalent to 15 large nuclear power plants running at full capacity simultaneously. And the power output continues to increase, slowly but measurably. Every 6 hours, energy readings tick upward by another 2 to 3%. Extrapolating forward, Atlas will reach approximately 25 gigawatts by the time it arrives at lunar distance. What requires 25 gigawatts of power? You could run a city of 5 million people with that much energy. You could power the most advanced particle physics experiments ever conceived. You could generate electromagnetic fields powerful enough to deflect solar wind across thousands of kilometers. Or you could charge weapons systems, defense shields, propulsion arrays, technologies designed to do things at planetary scale rather than human scale. Nobody knows what ATLAS is powering up, but everyone analyzing the data agrees. You don't generate 25 gigawatts of power for observation. You generate it for action. 2 days ago, NASA detected something that forced an emergency classified briefing with world leaders. Atlas is not alone. Deep Space Tracking Systems identified 6 smaller objects traveling in formation with Atlas. These objects are much smaller, roughly 200 to 500 meters in diameter each, but they're exhibiting the same characteristics: controlled trajectories, deceleration burns, manufactured surfaces. The smaller objects weren't visible during earlier observations because they were positioned directly behind Atlas from Earth's perspective, hidden in the larger object's radar shadow. Only when Atlas performed its most recent course correction did the smaller objects become visible as they adjusted their own trajectories to maintain formation. These aren't debris. These aren't natural satellites. The 6 objects are maintaining precise positions relative to ATLAS with active maneuvering. They're flying in formation like escort vessels around a much larger ship, and 3 days ago they began spreading out, slowly dispersing from their tight formation behind ATLAS into a wider pattern. Current projections suggest that by the time ATLAS reaches lunar distance, these 6 objects will be distributed in a geometric pattern around Earth, one approximately every 60 degrees around our planet's equatorial plane. They're positioning themselves in a grid, a network, like satellites deploying into optimal coverage positions, except these satellites are 200 to 500 meters across and arrived from interstellar space. Spectroscopic analysis of the smaller objects shows similar surface characteristics to ATLAS. Dark, highly engineered surfaces with geometric structures designed to minimize radar reflection. Stealth features. Like military reconnaissance drones scaled up to the size of skyscrapers. And all 6 objects are showing the same energy signatures that ATLAS displayed before its major power-up. Thermal emissions, electromagnetic activity, power systems activating. They're preparing for something, synchronizing their readiness with ATLAS's timeline. One analyst calculated the optimal coverage pattern these 6 objects would achieve once fully deployed. Collectively, they would have direct line of sight to approximately 94% of Earth's surface at any given time. No matter where you are on the planet, at least 2 of these objects would have visual and radar coverage of your location. That's not exploration positioning, that's surveillance architecture, or targeting coverage. As Atlas approaches, the communications we've been monitoring have increased exponentially. What started as occasional transmissions has become nearly continuous signal traffic. Atlas is broadcasting constantly now. Massive data packages sent toward deep space every few hours. Shorter transmissions exchanged with the 6 escort objects. And something new. Brief, high-frequency bursts directed at Earth itself. These Earth-directed transmissions started 4 days ago. They're not attempts to communicate with us, wrong frequency, wrong modulation. They're sensor returns, active radar or similar scanning technology, bouncing signals off Earth and receiving the echoes. Atlas is mapping our planet, not passively observing, actively scanning with what must be extremely sophisticated sensors. The scanning resolution is increasing daily as the distance decreases. What started as crude continental scale mapping has refined to the point where analysts believe Atlas can now distinguish features as small as 30 meters across from its current distance. That's resolution good enough to identify individual buildings, infrastructure, military installations, population centers, major transportation networks. Every significant human structure on Earth is now visible to whatever sensor systems Atlas is employing. But the communications aren't just outbound scanning. Atlas is receiving responses. The deep space transmissions it sends out are being answered. Someone or something far beyond our solar system is in active dialogue with ATLAS, receiving updated reports, sending back instructions or data. The communication protocols show structure consistent with command and control networks. Atlas sends situation reports, receives updated instructions, confirms receipt and understanding, then executes new actions based on those instructions. We're not just being visited by one massive object, we're watching a coordinated operation where ATLAS is the local asset receiving orders from command authority somewhere in deep space. It's following a plan, executing instructions, operating as part of a larger organized effort. And the most recent transmissions from Atlas back to its distant controllers included a brief signal that NASA's AI systems flagged as significant, a sequence that appears to represent arrival confirmation or position reached. Atlas just reported that it's on schedule, that it's arriving as planned, that whatever it was sent here to do, it's now ready to begin. Something completely unexpected happened 36 hours ago that has NASA in absolute crisis mode. Earth's moon is responding to Atlas's presence. Seismometers, left on the lunar surface by Apollo missions, instruments that have been measuring moonquakes for over 50 years, suddenly detected unusual vibrations, not impact-related quakes, not thermal stress patterns, organized rhythmic pulses originating from deep beneath the lunar surface. The vibration pattern is regular, repeating every 11 minutes, and it started exactly 2 hours after Atlas performed its most recent major course correction that confirmed it was heading for lunar orbital distance. The timing is impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The moon's seismic activity increased in direct response to ATLAS's movements, but it gets stranger. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter detected temperature anomalies on the far side of the moon, 3 specific locations showing localized heating that can't be explained by solar radiation or normal thermal patterns. These hotspots emerged simultaneously with the seismic activity. The hotspots form a perfect equilateral triangle, each point approximately 400 kilometers from the others. That's not natural. Natural thermal activity doesn't arrange itself in geometric patterns. Ground-penetrating radar from the orbiter detected something even more disturbing: structural anomalies beneath the lunar surface at the exact locations of the hotspots. Cavities, large hollow spaces that weren't in any previous surveys. Either they're new or something prevented their detection before. These cavities are massive, each roughly 2 kilometers across, located approximately 5 kilometers beneath the lunar surface, and they're showing electromagnetic signatures. Active systems, like something buried under the moon, is powering up. One researcher proposed what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to say, what if the moon isn't entirely natural? What if there's infrastructure inside it that's been dormant and is now activating in response to ATLAS's approach? That sounds like conspiracy theory territory, except the data is undeniable. The seismic patterns, thermal signatures, and subsurface structures are all real, measurable, and synchronized with ATLAS's arrival timeline. The most unsettling detail: NASA detected brief electromagnetic transmissions from one of the lunar subsurface structures. The transmission was directed upward, toward space, specifically toward ATLAS's current position. The moon just sent a signal to ATLAS, and 3 hours later, ATLAS responded with a transmission toward the moon's surface. They're communicating. Atlas and something inside Earth's moon are exchanging signals. We're not just being visited by an interstellar object. We're watching 2 artificial systems, one arriving from deep space, one potentially dormant inside our moon for who knows how long. waking up and recognizing each other. The question nobody wants to ask out loud: how long has that lunar infrastructure been there? If it was placed recently by scouts we never detected, that's one terrifying scenario. But the alternative is even more disturbing. What if it's been inside our moon for much longer? Centuries, millennia, waiting dormant for ATLAS to arrive and trigger its activation. Geological surveys of the moon never detected these structures before. Either they were too deep to scan properly, or something about their composition prevented detection, or they weren't detectable because they were deliberately designed to remain hidden until specific conditions were met. The activation timing is too precise to be coincidental. Atlas performs a course correction confirming lunar orbit destination, and within 2 hours, dormant systems inside the moon begin powering up. That's not accidental detection of ATLAS's presence. That's programmed response to a specific signal or condition. We might be witnessing something beyond first contact. We might be watching the final stage of a plan that was set in motion before human civilization existed. Atlas traveling across light years to reach Earth. Infrastructure placed inside our moon, waiting for that arrival. Systems coordinating across time spans and distances that make human history look like a footnote. Different agencies are scrambling to prepare responses. Defense systems are being readied, though defending against a 47-kilometer object with escort vessels and support systems already embedded in our moon is nearly impossible to conceptualize. First contact protocols are being activated. Linguists, xenobiologists, diplomats briefed on communication scenarios. Though, how do you negotiate with something that planned its arrival on our timescale before you existed? And quietly, certain governments are preparing survival scenarios, identifying essential personnel, securing resources, planning for continuity of civilization if Atlas's intentions prove incompatible with human survival. But here's the reality. Atlas has demonstrated technological capabilities so far beyond ours that preparation might be futile. If they crossed interstellar space in a 47-kilometer vessel with escort fleet and dormant lunar support systems, our options are limited regardless of their intentions. We're not approaching first contact on equal terms. We're being visited by something that has been planning this for longer than we can measure, with capabilities we can barely detect and infrastructure already in place around our planet that we never knew existed. The only question that matters: why? Why travel light years to reach Earth specifically? Why install systems in our moon? Why bring escort vessels and enough power generation to run cities? Why approach in the deliberately deceptive way that concealed the true scale until it was too close to matter? In 14 days, we'll start getting answers. Whether we're ready for those answers or not,